All right, what's up, y'all? Welcome back. I'm, of course, Wes Mitchell. He is Chris Clark on the Gamecock Central YouTube. And as always, I'm going to have to take a second to sort of get all our links out. And actually, I'm going to reset my webcam here just a little bit. All right, what's up, y'all? Welcome back. I'm, of course, Wes Mitchell. We are officially live. That appears to be working. In the meantime, what's been up, Chris?
Oh, man, just a lot. People keep asking me, like, are you busy? And I'm like, yeah, pretty busy. We still got a lot going on around here, which I'm glad about. It's been fun. Still a lot of recruiting stuff, a lot of what's going on with football stuff, which we're going to get into, I'm sure. So,
yeah, it really, honestly, truly never ends, which has been, I would say, a blessing. I am thankful for that, all things considered, that, well, for one, we still have jobs. So that's the biggest part of it. And we still have a fan base that, honestly, man, as much as, we all miss sports and as much as we want sports to come back, the fan base has remained, I would say, remarkably dialed in to the goings on of Gamecocks football recruiting. And, I think people are still excited, at least for the possibility of a season, and obviously excited for sports to return, Chris, whenever that may actually happen.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think, tons of questions about when the football season is going to start, but people are ready for it. And the interesting thing is, at some point here soon, well, it's already begun a little bit, with some other sports and, soccer, albeit very differently, has restarted. But, whether it's, NBA or MLB, some stuff's going to start back. Still looks like they're getting closer rather to an NFL season. But college football is really a huge question for folks now. But and it's become more of a question, I guess, over the last, really including over the last several days. More so, the conversation has really intensified there. But I think the release that we're going to get into of the NCAA guidelines has gotten people's wheels turning a little bit more, made it maybe a little bit more real that at some point it's going to return, it looks like, but we still just really don't know when. And I think we'll probably, if I had to say, probably have to wait a couple more weeks until we have a better sense of that, in terms of college football, but more live sports, it seems like, starting to sort of trickle back into our lives now.
Yeah. And by the way, welcome everybody who's already on here. I see a couple of chats already. Rob, what's up, man? Appreciate the comment there. And if you're listening, if you're listening or watching where it's embedded on the page, then certainly appreciate you joining. But if you click through to actually watch on YouTube directly, then you'll see the little chat bar there to the right, and that would be the quickest way for you to get a hold of us and for you to be able to get your question in and for us to answer it, because ultimately these things, we want to sort of let you, the viewer, drive them. Again, he is Chris Clark. I'm Wes Mitchell, and we're from GamecockCentral.com, and we hope that you're joining us as somebody who knows us from our work there. But if you're not, we certainly hope that you'll check us out on Gamecock Central at some point as well. And yeah, man, I would say the last few weeks, Chris, for us, for South Carolina in general, for Gamecocks football, that's probably been the two things. It's been Gamecocks recruiting, which obviously is the one thing that just never stops. And then this question that we're all facing right now, is there going to be college football? What does it look like? Once it gets going, is it let's be honest, my next question, if we get past the question of is there a college football this year and then when does it start, Chris, my next question then becomes, can we as a whole get through the season? Can we make this happen? Can we safely have I shouldn't even say a complete season, but can we safely get through whatever is deemed the goal as far as the number of games that they want to have? And I think the new guidelines suggested protocols that have come out are sort of the next step, you would say, towards that. And, Chris, we were looking through it, and the way things are right now with the number of cases and looking through sort of what happens if there is a case, what happens if, you have close contact with someone who is positive. There are still a lot of questions to the extent, even if we're able to have a season and it started relatively on time, there's a very real possibility of some actual, I would say hangups or pauses or even forfeits at various points during the season.
And that's been a concern for quite some time. We've talked a lot about the evolution of sort of the plan for college football, how it went from we don't know anything at the beginning into we're definitely having it on time and let's see how many fans we can pack in to now very up in the air. But through all those evolutions, I think I've had several people tell me that the big concern that they had, aside from some of the obvious things, player safety and, hospitalization, trends and all these different types of things, those are obvious. But a big concern wasn't just, hey, when we open, oh, okay, we're open now. No, there are a lot of things to consider about that. And our concern has long been for folks, hey, are we going to have to start canceling some games? Are we going to lose half a team? What if an entire offensive line has to be quarantined? Do you have to go play the game now? And in some ways, we still don't know the answers to those. There are a lot of things that we still don't have answers to, even with these guidelines have come out. I mean, even if they said today, we're going to play and we're going to play this season, whatever iteration it is, we would still have some questions about, what exactly are these teams supposed to do under certain scenarios? I think those are still there. And this isn't my opinion, Wes, even. I'm just passing on what some people inside college football have said. I had one tell me today, I was asking about, training and practice and all these different challenges. And it was brought up to me that, hey, training, like the strength and conditioning part is like the easiest part of this, right? Because that's when you can bubble up guys the most. You can put them in pods, et cetera, et cetera. It's when the campus at large comes back, when school starts back. I had someone tell me today, like, we're screwed when that happens, because then you've got, when you're introducing all the external factors and the population at large, et cetera, and it's difficult to control all that. I think that's a really, really, difficult thing. And, the other thing, even with these protocols that we're going to get in place, get to here in a minute. I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but just so I remember it, this close contact thing, Wes. Mm-hmm. So is this, the 10-minute or the 15-minute, range for the close contact? Is that, I posed this question to somebody who didn't know, is that for at one time, or is it over the course of a game? Because you think about, say a defensive tackle and an offensive guard in a game, in total, they're going to have 15 minutes probably, So like, how do you count those things? So there are just still a lot of unanswered questions, even now, even though there's been some guidance that's been released, and how all that goes and how teams deal with it is sort of extreme, hey, one person test. I mean, you could be losing a huge number of guys because you have to go quarantine them. And it's crazy. It's hard to envision it going all smoothly, for the duration of the season.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. Again, appreciate you guys joining us, Rob, Wesley Hodge, I should say. Bring It Junior. Yeah, appreciate the comment. CJ Stokes' dad on here, man. I appreciate that. Your son is very fast, man. I was at state championship game when Hammond, of course, won. And I don't even think CJ's dad knows this, but I was sitting a couple of rows back from him and just had a blast watching them, get to see CJ play so well and Hammond play so well in that game and win another state title. So we appreciate you joining us and listening and watching here on YouTube. And let's see, we got somebody else on here as well. Brandon Langford, appreciate the comment, man. Brandon wants to know, what do you see as the biggest unaddressed need in the 21 class so far? I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and hit that, Chris. Then we're gonna pop back to the talk about football and the new protocols and all that. But I was thinking earlier today, Chris, now that they've sort of had this run of recruits, you can kind of start to see the foundation of the 2021 class. And now you can sort of maybe start to pare down your board a little bit. You really start to focus in on, like Brandon's asking, what are your big needs for that final, however many spots it is. And, I think you start to focus in on best available in a sense as well. So I think there's probably two things at play here. One, what position needs need to be met, and two, who are sort of the best available players left that are highly interested in you. And then I think you trying to sort of fill those spots with the best combination, of those two things.
Yeah. And, there's still, first of all, they don't have a ton of spots left when you really think about it. I mean, if you look at the scholarship numbers overall, you look at the number of commitments that are already in the boat, you have a hard time seeing how South Carolina ends up taking, say, 25 in this class. I mean, you look at certain positions, offensive line, they're probably done. Quarterback, they're done. They may take, say another running back and and a tight end, but it sort of depends on, who you can get, et cetera. Defensive linemen, the numbers are lower there since they got some guys in the boat, maybe one more linebacker. To me, I guess I would answer the question, Wes, by saying probably defensive back. I think taking a couple more corners in this class is probably something South Carolina is going to look to do. They've got one in the boat in Marcellus Dial, the junior college prospect out of Georgia Military. But you just look at it, and J.C. Horn, I mean, if they play this year, J.C. Horn, I mean, can you really bank on him for a senior year return? I don't think so. Israel Mukwamu has picked up, some positive pub, and we'll see how he does this year. And then you got some young guys on the roster like, John Dixon and Cam Smith and some others, who you feel like can be good players, but just replenishing the numbers and building some more depth there. I'd probably point to defensive back when you look at what's the biggest like actual need based on the numbers and what's in the class, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And then I think past that, you start to look at, are you taking a second running back? You look at, I think adding another wide receiver to the mix is something they'd like to do. And then, then like I said, there's specific guys as well. Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, you feel really good about the structure of their defensive line class so far. But as far as being a true high priority target and someone that is an in-state, highly recruited kid that you always want to protect your borders on, I would say you look at him as being a need from the standpoint of this is one of the prospects that they really want. So, yeah, I'd go DB certainly, another receiver. We'll see what happens at running back, maybe another running back, and then some very specific guys. And then, probably take a tight end there. Certainly Bryson Nesbitt, a big target for them as well. All right, we got another question on here as well right now from Rob, who's got an interesting question. Who do you think will be the first five on the field in the secondary? And, I think that's a good way to frame the question because South Carolina, I think, approaches, the guys that they're putting on the field from that same standpoint, as in, not necessarily position by position, but more what's the best combination in the secondary of five guys. And, Chris, I would look at it, and I think to start with two of the guys you said already, there's no question that J.C. Horn, Izzy Mukwamu, and Jamie Robinson are three of the best five and are going to be on the field. I think that part is completely certain. Now, exactly how, you sort of structure it and get them on the field, and then really, who's next, I think is where the questions start to arise. Does Izzy make the move to safety? I think in order for that to happen, Johnny Dixon or Cam Smith have to take that big step forward. We've talked about it, cornerback. Then maybe you can slide them over. Jamie Robinson, is he playing nickel pretty much completely, or is he playing safety all the time, or is he playing safety when you're in the 4-3, but then slides to nickel when you're in nickel personnel? I'm not sure. We'll see. But safe to say those three guys are on the field. So we'll go ahead and put that part out there. But who do you think is in the running, Chris, to be, I would say, the next two, if you're talking about, a nickel iteration of the defense, or you do have 5 defensive backs out there?
Yeah, so I mean, the guys that would come to mind is you think if you look at a nickel configuration, depending on where those other 3 guys are, I think you got, you consider Johnny Dixon and Cam Smith for a corner spot, and then you look at R.J. Roderick and Jalen Dickerson at safety, right? I mean, I think those 7 guys, I'm bad at math, that we mentioned are probably the ones that you're looking at for 5 spots. So I think if I had to say, and this may be, it's a little going out on a limb because they didn't even finish spring ball, but I think South Carolina would like to play Izzy at safety. That's where I think they would like to land. Will it definitely happen? I don't know. But so I look at it as I'll give John Dixon the nod there over Cam just because he actually did play a little last year. Cam played a little, but Dixon played a little bit more. He started the first game, right? And so I look at JC and John Dixon at corner. Then I look at Bakwamu at safety, Jamie at nickel, and RJ Roderick because of experience at the safety spot. And then when they go to 4, when you just go to a 4-man iteration, I think you look at still Dixon and Horn, if you feel good about that, and then move Jamie back to safety, alongside Israel Bakwamu. But Jalen Dickerson's a guy I think if he stays healthy could really, really push, if he can be consistent and if he's healthy, I think he's going to have a chance to really push there at safety too. We on the same page with that?
Yeah, I think so, man. And I think Jalen Dickerson is sort of the guy that could kind of change. He's maybe the wild card of that group where if he can get to that point that, I mean, when he got here, man, the stuff we were hearing, was that this guy's definitely going to play, possibly going to push for a starting spot as a true freshman. He was an early enrollee, I believe, just was someone that they were really, really high on. And the injuries have just kept that, from happening. So I think there's going to be maybe some rust, but if he can ever get back to sort of what they thought, then to me, that's the wild card that maybe opens up everything a bit more and makes you really feel good, I think, about that secondary as well, regardless of, whether Izzy plays corner or plays safety. If Dickerson is playing at a high level, then that I think helps everything else fall into place. Because like I said, I think you feel really good, man, about those other 3 guys. I think Jamie Robinson, we already know what, JC and Izzy can do. And then I think Jamie Robinson had a really impressive freshman year and will only build on that because he's one of those guys, man, that's a tireless worker, has the right attitude on and off the field, and that I think has a really bright future in this program. So we'll see. But, yeah, really good question, Rob, and one that's really, frankly, only going to be answered in preseason practice when we see how those young corners, perform and improve and show consistency. That's always the key for young guys, I feel like, is to be consistent. All right, question from No Name. Are you hearing anything about the workouts on the current team? Who is standing out? Any surprises, etc.? I would say Chris has been kind of quiet as far as specific standouts. I've seen, South Carolina started posting the videos and stuff, and even Paul Jackson. By the way, if you're an Instagrammer, Paul Jackson is actually pretty active, I would say, on Instagram as far as posting on the Instagram stories, just little stuff from practice, or not practice, but the workouts that they're doing right now. So, as far as guys that have stood out, it's honestly, if you've read our stuff, it's been the same. People want to talk about newcomers. Marshawn Lloyd, he's the guy. He's everything that everybody thought he was going to be. I believe safe to say is going to be the starter at running back this year, even as a true freshman right off the bat. Luke Doty continues to impress. I would say there. I'm sure there's other guys. Colin Hill, the transfer from Colorado State. We've been told not to count out him in the quarterback race. I don't know, Chris. Have you heard any other guys mentioned as far as standouts this summer?
No, I mean the ones you mentioned. You're right. People definitely want to talk about newcomers, particularly big impact guys. potential impact guys. So Marshawn's definitely one that, I mean, even if you're trying to avoid talking about him, you can't. You know, you try to get somebody to mention somebody else, and he comes up. And Luke Doty, for his leadership and what he's done, certainly one. You know, Mo Kaba continues to do well. You know, and he's a guy that I think he can break into the rotation there. We have heard some positive things about Colin Hill, certainly with him, you know, being healthier and having some experience. He's a guy for sure. And I think you always look at some of the upperclassmen guy that you always hear good things about in terms of how they conduct themselves in their workouts. Sedarius Hutcherson, for example, has always been, you know, a guy that you hear as being a big standout in the weight room. But I can't say we've picked up a ton of like, you know, new, surprising, you know, super exciting stuff at this point. And it's been obviously a really different environment too for workouts, just with how they had to structure things. Has definitely been different.
Yeah, and I would say I'll go broken record. Rashad Amos, I think he's a guy to watch. I continue to hear, you know, for a freshman, this is someone that could play a lot faster than, you know, than anybody suspected with him coming in. But you know, we'll see, man. It has been, I would say, a little bit quieter than most years, but obviously just a very different situation, man. And just everything about sports right now is very different than we're used to it being. Let's see. Rob says, I expect South Carolina to surprise some teams this year. I see them coming up very hungry. Try to show people that last year was not what we are. What do you think? I mean, yeah, that's certainly the glass half full hope if you're a Gamecock fan. You know, we'll see. I think that's certainly possible. I think there's still questions to be answered. And, you know, like I think I said this in one of the ones a couple weeks ago. It might have even been last week. I don't know. But, Chris, I don't even know, and this seems just crazy to say about college football, as important as wins and losses are. I don't even know, like, what even are expectations right now as far as wins and losses for this season? What does the season even look like? Do expectations change if you're only playing a conference slate? I mean, most SEC teams are scheduling out of conference games that, you know, other than obviously South Carolina, Clemson, that you're expecting to win. So those may be disappearing. You know, I don't even know what my expectations are for South Carolina this year because, we don't even really – I mean, there's a schedule right now officially, but do we know what the schedule is actually going to be? No. Does winning this year matter near as much as just getting through the season, staying healthy, and, you know, I would say show progress as a program, but it goes against everything you think about with sports. But I don't know if wins and losses are in the top three things this year.
Yeah, I mean, good luck saying that on after a loss on Saturday, but I do think you're right. You know, and that was something people asked us a lot at the outset, man. I remember, and even still is, you know, how is this, you know, the pandemic and sort of the fallout from it, how's it going to affect, you know, the season in terms of if South Carolina doesn't have a great year, you know, financially, what's it look like if they felt like they needed to do something different, or will, you know, the staff, if they don't have a great year, will they get more of a pass because of unique circumstances? And I think, you know, the answer to that is probably increasingly yes, just because the uncertainty level has really like even gone up a lot, you know, since that time because of the schedule. I mean, what if they play 8 games? Mm-hmm. Are you going to say, well, they got to win 6 now? I mean, I don't know. I don't think so. I do think across the country, I won't apply this to just South Carolina, but across the country, the reality of the situation is athletic departments are going to be strained. It's going to be a very unique time. Who the heck knows if teams are going to be healthy, if we're going to have to cancel games, postpone them, move them? We don't know any of that right now. I mean, it is impossible to predict. And so I do think that given those circumstances, what you can say is going into the year, it's going to be very unique. And it probably is going to be a year in which you really run everything through a filter, right? And so, you know, even if it was a full season, and it doesn't look like it's going to be right now. So I do think that the circumstances have dictated that everybody probably across the country has a little bit more stability in their program, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, we'll see how how the expectations change from the fan base, depending on what the schedule looks like. All right. Wow. We actually got quite a bit of questions today. So we'll keep rolling through those. Graham, Hank Manos started game 1 last year versus North Carolina at center. Who is most likely to start at that spot to start this season? I'd say, that's probably the biggest question mark on the offensive line. I think at this point, not that everything's locked in, but you kind of have a decent feel for how it's going to work out at the other 4 spots, at least on paper. Is there still competition? Yes, but we have a good feel for what direction it's headed. Center, probably, your biggest question mark right now, and you got a number of guys there. I think as far as the guys who have played center and have practiced at center in the spring, I would maybe give the edge, and I think, Chris, we talked about this right now, you probably give the edge to the older guy and maybe Eric Douglas. But, I think Hank Manos still in the mix. I think Vinny Murphy, someone to watch. And then the real just sort of, I'll use the word again, wild card. The wild card to this mix would be, does Javon Gwynn slide over to center if you think that's your best 5, using the same terminology and approach we looked at defensive back. It's really about getting the best combination on the field, your best 5 guys. So the impressions that Jazz Turnitine made this spring and his sort of ability to go ahead and push for the starting left tackle spot, plus the young guys they have at tackle, I think allowed Sedarius Hutchinson for them to feel good about keeping him at guard. Well, all of a sudden you have quite a bit more maybe depth at guard than you did before. You have Jordan Rhodes obviously back. You have Javon Gwynn. Do you potentially move Javon Gwynn over to center, I think is the question there. So, it's going to be an open battle. Chris, of the guys at center, are you still leaning maybe Douglas, with the caveat that if somebody rolls into fall camp and just tears it up, obviously it's an open competition. So that's really it's an educated guess. It's a projection based on where things are now. But we've seen this time and time again. Eric Wolford, he is firmly in the camp of cross training and get my best 5 on the field. So if the best 5 involves sliding Gwynn over to center, then that's what he'll end up doing.
Yeah, and it is very much a projection, and you don't feel great about picking anybody there just because there's so long. If it was that firmly in place like it is at some spots, then it wouldn't be much of a conversation. You just say, here's what it's going to be because this was the guy that took all the first team snaps, or this is the guy that started at the same position for 3 years and he's going into year 4. He started there for 2 years going into year 3, and they just don't have that. Not that means there's a shortage of options that could be quality. They might be just fine there, but it's just unsettled because of, they don't have a guy who's held it down for 2 or 3 years. And so I would still lean Douglas just because I feel like that's where it probably was exiting the spring, the very shortened spring. It could have even changed halfway through spring. We didn't get there. It could have been one of the other 2 or 3 guys before the middle of spring or the end of spring, but it wasn't there. So I think it could very much change. Wouldn't be surprised if it ended up being any of those guys that you mentioned. I would just give the nod very low confidence on Douglas just because I feel like it could change and it's really going to be a big competition there.
All right, question from Brandon. Outside of this year, what do you see schematically as the future of the tight end and fullback position in a Mike Bobo offense? Do you see those position/body types/roles morphing into one do-it-all H-back? That's an interesting question. I think looking at South Carolina's current roster, looking at what he did at Colorado State, one thing, Chris and I talked about immediately after we started watching some of their games from last year, it's very multiple, and it's going to be very much focused on what the talent is on South Carolina's current roster. Now, in an ideal world, I think I kind of like where your head is at because I think we've seen at Colorado State, where he likes to use his, I don't even know if you would call them tight ends or fullbacks, those sort of body types, you would say. He does like to sort of use them in a multitude of ways. He likes to move them around like an H-back. He'll motion them out of the backfield. He'll motion them out onto the edges and use them as blockers, in the perimeter screen game to wide receivers as well. So those are versatile positions. Now, does it mold into one spot? I don't know, because I get the sense there will be times when we're going to see some true, old school personnel where you have the tight end and the fullback on the field at the same time, a lead blocker and then an inline tight end, to sort of set the edge there. So I think the morphing of the offense is probably going to depend more on South Carolina's personnel than anything. But, I do think that he sort of makes a good point, does Brandon, Chris, in that it is a versatile approach to those positions as opposed to the old school. This guy's a fullback. He's only a lead blocker, and that's all he does. And then this guy's a tight end.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to, and you made a good point. I mean, it's been very multiple with what Bobo did at Colorado State. I mean, you look even within the structure of the offense, and sometimes they're coming out in I formation, and sometimes they're in four wide, and all those different things. Using an H back, they're using the inline tight end. But I think back to his time at Georgia, and I remember when he had Aaron White, and Orson Charles, for example, and Orson Charles being a smaller guy, who looks more like an H back or a slot type tight end. Aaron White being a little bit of a bigger guy, and so he could do a lot of different things with those guys, even shift them out. So it's tougher for the defense to count them or see where exactly they're going to play. But he could use those guys in line. He could split them out in the slot. We saw South Carolina use Hayden Hurst a lot in the slot, for example, a few years ago. And they've got some guys that can do that, whether it's like a Nick Muse or a Jaheim Bell, for example. And then you've got the transfer from Colorado State, Adam Prentice, that can, play some different roles, whether it's a fullback or an H-back type. So they have some intriguing body types and skill sets. And I think they can sort of mix and match that to like you said, Wes, you really look at what your personnel can do. And so we don't know quite yet, what that'll look like in full as they continue to go through, training and reviewing film and practice, preseason camp, whenever that happens. They'll be able to find that out a little bit more. But odds are they have a pretty good idea, of some of the things they can do. And they have some different types of guys that they can deploy in those situations.
Yeah, and I think Adam Prentice, will be a very, I would say, vital part of this offense, and a smart transfer in for South Carolina, because they didn't necessarily have someone like that on the roster who, can do some of the things that Adam Prentice can. And I think he's already impressed his teammates in 5 practices as a tough-nosed, hard hitter type guy, and as a lead blocker, could also play some tight end as well. So I think they'll move him around. Let's see. David says, what do you think about RJ beefing up and moving to linebacker? That's not something I've heard. I mean, I've always thought RJ had sort of a bigger body type for safety, but, I think he's put so much into transitioning to safety and being a safety, and they've recruited so well at linebacker that, I'd be surprised if we see that type of full-time move. Now, we have seen RJ play some nickel last year. At times it was him, at times it was Jamie Robinson. And, sometimes that nickel is sort of like the old spur. It's kind of a hybrid spot in the way that it's used at times. But personally, I'd be surprised if RJ made that full move to linebacker. Are we on the same page there, Chris?
Definitely. And I think really the biggest reason, honestly, is just being the lack of depth at safety. I mean, you don't feel great about that, not that South Carolina, you don't look at the linebacker roster and say, oh, they're 3 deep here and everything's great. I mean, you feel good about that position overall, I think, but safety is one that South Carolina, look, they got to figure that out. And we're sitting here talking about who the 2 starters are definitely going to be. That's not even certain. And so certainly when you look at the depth where you've only got, I don't know, whether you have 3, maybe 4 guys that you would feel pretty good about are decent about going into the season. I think they've got to preserve those, for a variety of reasons.
Yep. All right, Adam Fox. I think that's a new name, so I appreciate you joining us there, Adam. Any word on Zaquandre White's grades? I will take this one. No word official yet. I would look towards the end of next week, Adam. Today is the 17th, so I would look towards about a week from now, 24th, sometime around there, for when I believe that we're going to hear some type of resolution on that situation. So should know soon. I mean, there is what's the best way to say it? I would say there's some confidence in that, but I don't think anything, like I said, is official. Nothing's locked in, and I would say they're cautiously optimistic is probably the best way to say. The thought right now about Zaquandre White and potentially getting in, and if he gets here, I'll use the word again. I guess it's the word of the day. He's a wild card on offense as being someone who really could potentially help provide another playmaking aspect to an offense that, that's going to need as many of those as they can find. All right. So if you have more questions, put them in the box there. And let's see. Got another question. Graham wants to know any possible way Doty ends up playing receiver if he isn't QB1 or QB2 to start the season, like he did at Myrtle Beach before he was QB1 there. I can rightfully tell you that if they asked Luke Doty to go play center this year, that he would ask where he can go practice his snapping and would do anything he possibly could to help the team. So, he's a guy that would be open to that. Could he help you at receiver? Maybe. Could he help you at special teams? Certainly. But Chris, I don't think you jeopardize his learning of quarterback and progressing at quarterback in exchange for him, I won't say wasting away at receiver, but potentially wasting away at receiver. Like, is that is the upside there? That, I mean, you're learning a whole new position. I mean, I know he went out there and at high school level, somebody as athletic as Luke, you could just say, all right, man, here's some routes. You already know the offense. You can get open. At the college level, getting open, all the different route combinations and sort of changing routes on the fly, all that stuff. It's an undertaking if you're not a full-time wide receiver. So throw that in and consider that it's going to take away his time at quarterback. I don't see that one happening.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Now, there's no question athletically he could do it. I think he's smart enough to do it if it's something that you hone in on full time. But I just don't see that happening. Like you said, the potential and the positional vision that South Carolina has for him is quarterback. And so I think that's where you focus in on. And do they need help at receiver? Sure. But I think you need Luke Doty in that quarterback room, to learn and you never know what's going to happen, man. He might have to play. I mean, it's hard to tell, you think about what happened last year, down to your third quarterback who's not 100%. And so I think you keep him there, and you always can consider that athletically. That's the great thing about Luke Doty is he could always play receiver, but we just haven't heard anything about that being in the cards, at this time.
Yeah. Rob, any possibility of a grad transfer coming on board for this season? I would say not that I've heard at all. Does that mean it could change? Yeah, I guess, but I haven't really heard anything in the works there. David, do you think JC leaves for the draft? Yeah, like Chris said earlier, I don't want to speak for JC Horn, but I've felt like JC Horn was a 3-year and NFL guy, honestly, from the moment he committed to South Carolina. The NFL bloodlines, the just baseline ability, the talent, the work ethic. I think he's very conservatively, I think JC Horn is a top 3 round guy, already. So big junior year, I would say without that's not really coming from like information, like he's saying he's leaving or anything, just the facts of the situation. A guy like that generally leaves, I think is the safest way to put it. Let's see, Twin Rivers, any other names at wide receiver with Bennett trending to Ole Miss? Chris, you got any thoughts on that one?
Yeah. So the first thought is that, obviously this is the most unique recruiting cycle we've covered, Wes. I don't want to speak for you, but I think we have talked about that. So, what we're seeing now is even prospects who have not been in a rush moving things up a little bit for a variety of reasons. And, some of them are jumping into places that they have not visited, but some are going the route of they want to get a spot at a place they have seen. And so when you look at Malachi Bennett, he's been super pro South Carolina. He has an awesome relationship with the staff. And so I think it's hard to look at it and reconcile, why is he going to commit to Ole Miss? And, really the main reason was he's been to Ole Miss and hasn't been to South Carolina. And so, in this sort of weird time where the boards are a little bit different at schools, there's so much uncertainty. We don't know when in-person recruiting is going to reopen. It can make some sense. You can see why. And so that said, the reason I said that is I wouldn't count Malachi Bennett as out at all. They'll continue recruiting him. They'll continue going through that process. And I think that things will probably continue there. And if he could visit, he can go visit. Aside from him, Keon Coleman's another one to watch who's committed to Kansas. I think sort of same boat. I don't think that's over yet. He's even publicly continued putting out some stuff, edits that South Carolina sent him. But those are probably, man, the main two guys. Well, there is one more, Jordan Mosley, who's also, he's committed to another school. He's committed to Tennessee. They'll probably keep swinging on him and, see if they can get him in for a visit if it's allowed at some point. So, they do have the cupboard's not bare at receiver with what they got in the class, some athlete types, true receiver types. But yeah, those are probably the main guys, those three that I mentioned.
Yeah, dude, by the way, if you haven't watched Jordan Mosley's film, that dude's good. Like really, really good. I really hadn't, I would say, dove into him and his film very much, but then I did here recently, and I can see why they are staying on him, even though he's committed to Tennessee. And, like we've said before, he's a guy that I think continues to have some interest in South Carolina. All right, Rutledge, how do you feel about Dakerion's transition to the receiver position? I've heard reports all over the place, and then we'll tie these two together. A question from Wesley. Who do you see as the third wide receiver in a three wide receiver set? We've probably talked about these two things as much as anything else this entire offseason, dating back to, the end of last year, going into this year, spring ball. Now, this time period when we've all been sort of in wait and see mode with quarantine and coronavirus, all this stuff. Wide receiver position, I still tend to think that Dakerion can transition well to that spot. I think he's bought into it. I think he's wants to be a wide receiver, which is a big important part of it. Can he be the third wide receiver? I don't know. I think as far as who the third guy is, some of it and where they line up is going to sort of determine, I would say what the third guy is in different scenarios, much like we're talking about getting the best five on the field at O-line, what gets you the best three on the field at receiver. Does Shi Smith play inside? Does he play outside? That's probably going to depend on sort of who, the third guy is. So, Chris, I would say we know Shi Smith is going to be a starter. So let's start there. Is there anybody else that we know or feel 90% is going to be a starter? Is Xavier Legette at that point or not really?
Still a little bit of a projection, but I really feel like that's going to happen. I really do. Just based on he did play some last year. They feel like he's got a lot of promise and a lot of raw ability. So when you just sort of look things over, maybe that's too strong because, he's still got some proving to do for sure. But I really feel like that's what's going to happen. I really feel like he's going to be, that second guy that you'd say who's definitely seeing the field as a starter. You'd obviously start with Shi, like you said, and then you go to Xavier.
Well, and Bobo talked him up. this spring, which is, I think, an important thing to note. And I think Bobo liked his toughness too, and the fact that he, that they had some guys banged up in the spring. We never really got details on all that, I don't think. But, one thing Bobo pointed out, he's like, this kid has been on the field for the entire spring. So even though it was 5 practices, he got valuable reps in this new offense, which I think was important for him. So if we look at it from those parameters and we're saying Shy and we're assuming X, then then the question is who's next. And I think there's just a variety of guys that are in that conversation. Could it be De'Carrion Joyner? Yes, it could be. Could it be Ortre Smith? Could it be Josh Van? Could it be Randricus Davis? Could it be one at some point? Does Rico Powers? Does Jakari Caldwell? At some point, does one of them enter the mix at that position? Is Jaheim Bell sort of? I don't know if you're calling him a receiver or not, but is he an option there? Do we see a lot of split out tight ends? With 2 tight end sets, so to speak. I mean, Nick Muse is a pass catching tight end, so I think that plays in. I've gone back and forth. I don't really have an answer, Chris, on who the third receiver is. If De'Carrion just absolutely sort of rolls into that position, actually getting to play it and lives up to, I think, the baseline potential there, then boom, it could be him. Is Ortre Smith completely healthy again? I mean, we saw a lot out of him as a freshman, I think. So it easily could be him. Josh Van, there's still a lot of upside there. So I don't really have an answer, but I think it's going to be sort of structured the way we laid it out.
Yeah, I'm on board with what you're saying there, pretty much exactly. And I'm very intrigued. When you think about Joyner, of do you use him in some unique ways within the offense? Some jet sweep stuff and stuff like that to sort of get him in space, because he's an elusive runner in space and he's not as seasoned as a receiver because he hasn't spent as much time there in game situations. But even in the limited time that we did see him, the limited reps, he did some things that sort of looked pretty natural to me. I think Xavier Legette he might be the highest upside guy on the whole roster at receiver, but there's just a lot of untapped potential that they have to get to. And obviously the receiver position was not good enough last year, and there was a lot that went into that. We don't have to rehash all that, but they've got some guys that are intriguing in terms of talent. They just have to go out there and show it. Obviously staying healthy is a big part of that, but I'm on board with how you laid it out right there.
Well, and man, I'm not so sure. Some people will push back on this, but if you ask me, the receiver play did take a step back when BMAC became OC. I think that there was some division of time as far as him having to be over top of the entire offense versus being able to work with the receivers. Even going back a couple of seasons ago, when you had some really, really good. We all love what Debo did, love what Brian Edwards did in his career. Obviously, super talented NFL guys, but there was a drop back just in the consistency at that position. Looking back to the 20, I guess that would have been 18 season. So I think they're, is Joe Cox a little bit obviously more inexperienced coach than BMAC was with the receivers? Yes, obviously, but sometimes having a new voice in the room, having a fresh slate, being able to start over a little bit, sometimes that can be good for guys from in a personal level, as far as their production and their development as a player. So I think it'll be an interesting position to follow. Let's see, kickoff returner, and punt returner guesses right now. That is a good question. I'm trying to think back. This stuff runs together so easily. I'm trying to think back into the spring if we got any definitive word on the guys that were working at those positions. I don't know that we did. Chris, do you remember? I think Shi Smith is certainly in the mix, at those positions. who else? We'll see. Who do you think makes sense? I mean, J.C. Horn, played some punt returner as a backup last year. Josh Van did it at times. I mean, there's some guys that are going to be in the mix there, but do you have a guy that just makes the most sense in your head?
Yeah, I think Shy because he's got a little bit of experience there. I think he certainly makes a lot of sense there as an option. That's another one that's going to be really sort of unsettled, I would say, because you look at the fact that South Carolina, ended up using Brian Edwards there when he was on the roster at punt return because he was a sure-handed guy. He may not have been as electric in the open field, which he did have some nice returns. Wasn't going to be as electric as certain guys, at the spot. But really, that's the top thing you look for is, who's going to be able to go and secure the ball for you there. And so I think when you look over the roster, he's probably Shy. Is probably the main guy to watch there. But it's just, he's very important, obviously, a receiver, but you got to go with who your best option is going to be. So I'd imagine, Wes, they're going to, continue auditioning a bunch of guys, some guys that, defensive back or maybe even some running backs and from the receiver group and just see, who secures the ball the best and who can potentially make some plays for them.
Yeah, definitely. All right, let's slam through these real quick. Graham wants to know where the odds Chandler Farrell catches a pass this season. I'm going to actually say that happens. Because there were a couple times last year where he was lined up. I remember one play in particular, I think it was against Georgia, where they actually had him split out wide. And, I think we're looking to maybe put him into a route or two. And that I think maybe on a trick play, 3 tight end set, goal line, maybe that happens. So are the odds that high? Maybe not, but I got a sneaky feeling maybe you see Chandler get to catch a pass. Assuming we have a season. So let's see, from Twin Rivers, seems we're really trying to increase speed at the skill positions, which is a great need. Are we still recruiting the running back out of North Carolina that's committed to Tennessee that runs a 10.5 100? Yeah, I would assume so. I haven't heard his name come up as much lately, but I think it's really a valid point to sort of point out there, Twin. Speed has been, I would say speed, Chris, and versatility are probably the two biggest trends that we've seen when you look at the 2021 class as a whole.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, a lot of guys tagged with the athlete tag. A lot of guys who play both ways or you look at Simeon Price. I mean, he played, I don't know. I counted it up one day and sort of already lost track. But 7 positions last year when you look at lined up everywhere in the secondary, lined up on the edge, he lined up at linebacker, then he played slot receiver and quarterback and running back on offense. So however many that is, 7, 8 positions. So it was wild. But yeah, I mean, they definitely looked at that. They definitely looked at, how can we upgrade speed? How can we upgrade athleticism? How can we upgrade some guys who, maybe can play multiple roles? And that doesn't mean that they're not adept at one or the other, but just maybe can you bring in some guys with versatility to where you can say, hey, we'll try him as a receiver, but if receiver doesn't work out, or if there's a bunch of guys ahead of him, let's move him over to defensive back and he'll be able to do that. Or just adding, speed to the running back core, adding, a little bit more speed or a little bit more skill to the receiver core. Those are certainly things that they've been focused in this class.
All right. Rob wants to know who is an older guy you think could have a breakout season on offense and defense. Whew, that's tough, man. Also, I think we've had a similar discussion maybe at some point. It's hard to have a true breakout guy at this point. But, would you count a Sherrod Green? I mean, I don't know. I kind of feel like he played very well last year, but I think he's going to move into a starter role this year full time. I would think maybe at the will linebacker spot. So, he's someone, maybe someone that doesn't play a prominent role, but, could maybe play more than people think, would maybe be Jabari Ellis on the defensive line, is a guy to watch, I think. But defensively, there's not even a lot of candidates. I feel like for that. Could Keir Thomas, who's really played his entire career, could he have saved his best for last and maybe have a big senior year? I mean, I could see that happening. I think for the most part, the older guys, though, Chris, are guys that have been playing for a while. So you sort of, you're already pulling from a very small pool of guys. On offense, I mean, I don't know, man. I'll tell you a guy that I would be thrilled for on offense would be Randricus Davis, just because everything that kid's been through, all the injuries, all the times he's had to fight back from that. Someone that he was here. That was Muschamp's first year.
Yeah.
He was here playing receiver as a true freshman. And from what I remember, made a few plays and just has been banged up ever since. So, as far as there's only so many possibilities for that. I think it'd be a great story if Randricus Davis, sort of came out of nowhere again and played a bunch at receiver. So I don't know, man. Is there anybody that sort of comes to your mind, Chris?
Well, by this point, man, Jalen Dickerson's an older player. So
yeah, true.
I might honestly pick him. He was in the 2017 class, so I might pick him. And then I would say if there are a couple guys maybe on the O line, like Jordan Rhodes has been a starter, right? But I mean, he was in the 2017 class. If he ends up being, taking another step forward, for example, I mean, he might be a guy that you could consider there just because he's been around the program a few years. And then Eric Douglas, I mean, he was also the 2017 class. And, he's played some. He's very, very sparingly. I don't know if he's never started, I don't think, right? He's played in several games on special teams, and he's gotten some time at guard, and he's worked at just pretty much every position in practice, but he's never made that breakthrough of being a starter. So let's say he wins the starting center job eventually. I'd consider that probably a breakout, right, for an older player, especially if he plays well. So those would probably be my two guys that come to mind on that question.
Yeah, you said Eric Douglas.
Yep.
Yeah, I think he started against North Carolina alongside.
Yes, he did. Now that might have been the only one, but yep, he did start against North Carolina.
Yeah,
right.
I think that was his lone start. So yeah, and man, a good kid too that works hard and a smart kid. So you love to see it work out for those guys that stick around. Let's see, and we're running out of time here. David, do you think we got a chance to flip Justice Boone from Florida? Chris, I tend to think the chances of that happening have maybe diminished a little bit. Now, again, if he takes a visit in the fall, anything can happen there. So I would say it's an incomplete answer.
Yep.
I wouldn't predict it right now, but if he starts taking trips in the fall, then all of a sudden my answer changes very quickly.
Yes, I would agree with that. I think it's really going to depend on a variety of factors. When does in-person recruiting open again? Which he's been to South Carolina a bunch. It's not like he hasn't seen it. Probably been there more than anywhere by far. But where's South Carolina's board? What's his timeline? I mean, let's say South Carolina got a commitment from, say, Tyrion Ingram Dawkins and another defensive lineman who's somewhat similar to Boone by October. Well, then you got to consider space, in the class overall. And so there's a lot to consider there. So I don't know if it's just a question of can South Carolina flip him. The answer is that would still be possible, but there's I think a lot that goes into that because of when you look at the board, when you start considering things like numbers overall.
Yeah. All right. So let's get to what we talked about from the beginning and tease. I don't want to leave it out. Chris, I know you put this in our newsletter this morning. By the way, our newsletter is a very easy, free way for you to get sort of a jump in the morning on what's been happening in Gamecock Nation, either what do you need to pay attention to that day or what happened the day before, just a way to sort of summarize everything and get you links to where you can read more about any topic you want. So, if you go to Gamecock Central, let's see, I'm trying to think what the easiest way to get signed up for that would be. Go to Gamecock Central and Actually, I would just say Google Gamecock Central newsletter. That's probably actually the quickest way now that I'm looking at it. But Chris, in a way that you could summarize it in 30 seconds, I would guess, what were your takeaways? What are the biggest keys to this new return to play protocol that the NCAA put out?
Mine really matched what yours would be. Not surprised by any of it because you just sort of go through and figure out what they might have to do. But man, just realizing that if somebody not even test positive, but if somebody has been in close contact with somebody who tested positive, they're out for 14 days, or quarantine, right? And the positive test people are isolated for at least 10 days. And there's certain things where they, return to action if they're asymptomatic for a certain number of days. But that was the one to me, and just not that surprised or anything at the actual policy that was proposed, but just in realizing of, hey, if there's one positive test, it's going to be potentially very problematic for an entire team or maybe even the opposing team. And then, the question that was created from that I referenced earlier, training, practice, how are you counting out that time for close contact? Is it cumulative? Is it at one time? Are you going to have to like mask up in between practice or during practice? Like, how are you going to do all that? Those are the biggest takeaways for me, not like the policies themselves, because we knew they were going to do a lot to try to control, quote unquote, this as much as they could.
All right. You're going to have to explain something to me.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of like, all right, am I just missing something here? Why the difference? All right. So it's 10 days if you yourself test positive.
Yes.
But 14 if you've come in contact with positive.
I had the same thought when I read that. So I'm not really sure why that is. That's the thing that I had a little bit of difficulty reconciling. I had to read it like 2 or 3 times, to make sure that I was grasping it. But that is what I came away with, unless I'm just not, grasping it. But yeah, that's what it seemed like.
Yeah, no, because my brain was like, wait, I'm not reading this right. Like, this is not. I mean, and I know you have, what do you call it, the incubation period, where it's like you've been in contact with the virus, but it hasn't set in yet. And I don't know how that, if you come in contact with someone who has it, and then you get tested 3 days later, is it automatically going to show up? Or if it's still in that incubation period, I think is what it's called, is it not going to show up at that point? I don't know those answers. So maybe that comes into it. And maybe there's a thought, if you've already tested positive, you've already gone through the first sort of 4 to 5 days of the process of having it. So we're chopping that part off.
Well, and one thing to also consider is that 10-day window for a positive case is only if they're asymptomatic, right? So if at any point during that 10 days, let's say on day 8, I got it, probably, I mean, they didn't even say serious symptoms. Now there's some designations on symptoms for when you should return to workouts, right? So, if you have mild symptoms, this, if you have moderate, this. But just for the purposes of this, from what I'm reading, it seems like if I'm in my isolation, I test positive, I feel fine, and no issues, and I'm working out and all that. Day 8, if I get the sniffles or if I start feeling really bad, then you discontinue sort of that part of the protocol, is what it seemed like to me.
Yeah, but dude, and then I don't know, man. It's not going to be easy.
No, it's really hard. I mean, the training part, what I mentioned earlier, what somebody in college football tell me that the training was the quote unquote easiest part. It's not easy, but putting kids in pods and maybe even having to mask up and having them distance, that's not that difficult, right? But it becomes problematic if you have somebody test positive and maybe they get it from outside. I think that seems like people's biggest worry And obviously there's going to be some worry when you introduce players hitting each other and being in close contact. There's more of a worry than training. It's practice, it's competition, and then it's sort of these external factors of, I don't know, whatever it is, kids going on dates or going to party, stuff like that, where you don't really know, you're not able to control it and bubble it up as much. And then you introduce that to, even if it's just one person on the team, maybe he's introducing that to the team. And then because of these protocols that they'll have to face, notwithstanding, man, anything about anybody actually getting seriously sick, which could happen, hopefully it wouldn't. But because you would have to follow these protocols, you could start losing some people. But there's still just so many questions about it for me, especially with this close contact isolation thing. Like, that's the part we don't have a great grasp of that right now.
Yeah. And then, hey, what on top of all this, what if you have a false positive that wrecks your season for no reason? What if you have a false negative that allows it to spread within your team because the test was wrong? So that, even in a perfect world, these tests aren't perfect. So I think, man, the thing right now, the big thing is, and I don't want to go all into the mask thing because everybody has an opinion about the stupid mask. But if, at this point, if there's any chance that the masks work, which I think they work based on data from other countries. But if you're the masks don't work person, then let's at least try it and see what happens. Because I think with this plan, Chris, the only way it works is if the overall case numbers are down. Because otherwise, and there's still going to be a chance, even if the virus isn't spreading as much as it is right now, there's still going to be a chance that some guys get it and it knocks everything out, multiple games canceled. But like if this was starting right now, I feel like as prevalent as the virus is, I think it would be borderline impossible to play with these current protocols, because very quickly somebody would test positive and then you'd have multiple people that were deemed close contact. Then they would be out for 2 weeks. And then, I mean, at that point, you're talking about multiple forfeits. So the only way this works is if we all figure out a way to get the overall numbers down. And then I think it's viable if the prevalence of the virus is sort of at a lower point than it is right now. Could it still completely wreck the season? Yes. But right now, I feel like it would definitely wreck the season. And to your point, man, there's going to have to be further examples of what counts as, because one thing I read said, it's 15 minutes of prolonged exposure, closer than 6 feet without a mask. So do you have your entire practice with the mask on? Does everybody have a mask? Are there built-in, one thing mentioned, face guards for helmets? So do you build in, I saw the NFL, some prototype come out for the NFL's protective case or protective masks on their helmets. So, how much does that sort of play into this? Like you said, is it a cumulative 15 minutes or is it 15 minutes period? What counts? I mean, if you're having first team versus second team in practice and somebody tests positive, is your entire offensive line and defensive line now out for 2 weeks? And Chris, the way things are right now, I think it severely impacts the way you have to practice. I mean, I think you have to structure your practice not even basically around the most efficient way to get your football team ready. I think you got to structure it around the most efficient way to get something done while also avoiding this virus.
Yeah, that's really what you have to do. And I think for everybody, the hope is that it would be the combo of what you said, Wes, with, having what we do know is that according to people in college football, whether or not you agree with this, where it is, and when I say you, I just mean anybody.
Yeah.
They want numbers to go down before they pull the trigger on the season. That is what it is. I mean, that's the reality of it, whether or not we agree with it. And so they want those numbers to go down. And then your hope would be that you can bubble up your players enough to where, let's say, like I remember, just to use an example, I think yesterday in South Carolina, if you believe the numbers or whatever, we're not going to get into all that. But I think the percent positive on 9,000 cases was like 20%, right?
Yeah.
So let's say, well, our players are probably not going to be at 20%, right? I mean, even with if they're testing weekly and before games, 72 hours, we can bubble them up enough. And let's say it's hopefully 0% for everybody for a lot of reasons, but half of that or a quarter or 1/8, whatever it may be. Your hope is that by bubbling your players up, ideally you're not that high. And then if case numbers are down nationally or wherever you're playing in South Carolina or whatever state you're in, you don't have as high of a chance anyway, even within your bubble. And so that's a way to control it. And then on top of that, figuring out how you practice. So it's sort of a 3-pronged thing, where you got to have case numbers lower overall, you got to bubble up, and then you got to figure out within your bubble, what are you doing there? And then you're going to have a better chance of not interrupting the season. Because as we said, man, that's been a concern of people for a long time. Even when cases were not as prevalent nationally, people were very concerned of it's going to get worse, or if there's just one little minor outbreak in the sport or across the team, that it's going to interrupt the whole season. And so that's something that they seem very concerned about.
Yeah. And ultimately, right now, do we have a lot of great ways to combat it? No, but do masks seem to help? Does social distancing seem to help? Whether you're tired of hearing about it or not, that's our best defense right now. So if we're going to have football, I feel like that's what we have to do. Ultimately, I think having better ways to treat it, which is what they're working on right now, and they hope. I was listening to Fauci yesterday. They hope in the next couple to few months we'll have much better ways to treat it, which means that in theory, getting it means far less consequences. So then the overall numbers aren't even as big of a thing because you have way less folks going to the hospital for it. And ultimately, by the end of the year, hopefully a vaccine. And then I think that's those two things combined, better treatments, an actual vaccine, are the big picture path, I think, to ultimately getting back to normal and to where you and I are sitting here talking about backup tight ends and centers as opposed to continuously talking about coronavirus for 6 months at the time. So that's my hope. Eventually we're going to get there. Has it gone on and on? Yes, absolutely. But eventually we're going to find a way to get there. And I just hope that we get some football this year and that we're actually talking about some games here in the somewhat near future, Chris. But yeah, man, I think we're out of questions here on the chat. Want to thank everybody for joining us. We had a lot of good questions there. Appreciate that. We're going to keep doing these. Chris, you got any closing thoughts, man?
Oh man, I'm really ready to, we're hoping for football. We're hoping for everybody to be safe. So we'll see what happens. But regardless of what happens, we'll be here. We'll be doing this again. So we appreciate everybody.
Yep, we'll be here. So everybody do your best. Stay safe. I know they suck, but wear your masks. For Chris, I'm Wes. Hit the subscribe button, and we'll talk to y'all next time.